Hey, sweetheart. Rank, or you just here to bring coffee? The question lands in the middle of Coronado Naval Base War Room like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kane stands near the tactical display, arms crossed, that trademark SEAL smirk plastered across his face. Around him, 6 other operators lean against consoles or check gear, their laughter rippling through the space, designed for classified briefings and strategic planning. Morning light filters through reinforced windows, casting hard shadows across maps and satellite imagery. In the corner, Victoria Chun stands perfectly still. Navy working uniform, no insignia, hair pulled back in a regulation bun. 29 years old, 5 feet 7 inches, unremarkable except for the way she holds herself. Spine straight, hands loose at her sides, eyes forward, tracking nothing and everything simultaneously. Kane takes 3 steps closer. His boots echo on polished concrete. I'm talking to you, sweetheart. What's your rank? Victoria Chun does not blink. Her voice emerges flat, stripped of inflection. I don't answer questions that lack proper military courtesy. The room temperature seems to drop 5 degrees. One of the SEALs, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, shifts his weight and exchanges a glance with the operator next to him. Something in that statement carried weight, not defiance, not fear, something else entirely. If you think this is just another bullying story, pay close attention. That woman just stood there taking hits like she was waiting for something specific. Hit that like button and subscribe because the price Marcus Kane pays is going to be unforgettable. Kane's smirk widens into something uglier. He closes the remaining distance in 2 deliberate strides, his hand shooting out to grab a fistful of Victoria's uniform collar. The fabric bunches tight in his grip as he yanks her forward close enough that his breath hits her face. I asked you a direct question, sweetheart. In my war room, you answer when a superior officer speaks. Victoria does not resist the pull, does not brace her feet or twist away from his grasp. She simply allows physics to move her body forward in a controlled lean, her center of gravity remaining perfectly balanced despite the force applied against her. Breathing stays unchanged. For counts in through the nose, for counts held, for counts out through the mouth, for counts empty. The rhythm continues beneath the surface, invisible to everyone watching, but somehow present in the absolute stillness of her shoulders. The unwavering focus in her eyes. 0 rank nobody. Kane announces to the room, loud enough for every operator to hear clearly. Probably wandered into the wrong building looking for the admin office. He releases her collar with a calculated shove. Just enough force to demonstrate dominance without crossing into what anyone could officially classify as assault. Just enough to humiliate without leaving evidence. Victoria adjusts her uniform with 2 economical movements, smoothing the wrinkled fabric back into regulation appearance. Her gaze never wavers from a fixed point approximately 6 inches to the left of Kane's face. Not avoidance, not submission. The calculated positioning of someone who has studied violence the way engineers study load-bearing structures, who understands angles and leverage and the precise mechanics of physical confrontation. Chief Rodriguez clears his throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. Marcus, maybe what? Kane wheels on him, eyes flashing with challenge. You got something to say, Chief? Something you want to contribute to this conversation? Rodriguez's jaw works for a moment. He is 43 years old with 22 years in the Navy, 14 of those with naval special warfare. He has watched operators crack under interrogation and civilians freeze when bullets start flying. What he is witnessing right now fits neither category. That woman is not frozen with fear. She is not panicking. She is waiting. And the distinction makes his pulse accelerate in a way he cannot quite explain. Nothing. Rodriguez finally says, jaw tight. Just noting we have briefing in 15 minutes. Better not be late. Kane turns back to Victoria, studying her like she is a puzzle he has not quite solved. A problem that refuses to resolve itself according to his expectations. Then he steps even closer, deliberately invading the bubble of personal space that military protocol usually maintains between service members of different ranks. You know what I think? His voice drops to something that might sound conversational to anyone not paying attention to the threat underneath each word. I think you're in way over your head. This is a SEAL briefing room. We handle classified operations here. Real combat missions, not whatever paper pushing you usually do behind a desk. Victoria's breathing continues its 4-count pattern, steady as a metronome. Her hands remain loose at her sides, ready but not tense. When she speaks, her tone carries no more emotion than a weather forecast reading atmospheric pressure. Is there anything else, sir? The honorific lands wrong. Too precise, too empty of actual difference or respect. Kane's expression darkens like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. Without warning, he places both palms against the center of Victoria's chest and shoves hard. Not a punch, not a strike, but a two-handed push delivered with the full mechanical advantage of a seal's upper body strength. The force sends her backward 3 full steps until her spine impacts the concrete wall with an audible thud that reverberates through the war room. Maps on nearby boards shiver slightly from the vibration, but Victoria does not cry out, does not gasp or bring her hands up defensively or show any indication that the collision hurt. Though basic physics dictates it must have. She simply stands against the wall, weight distributed evenly through both feet, and looks at Kane with those same flat measuring eyes that reveal absolutely nothing about what she is thinking or feeling. Marcus, Rodriguez's voice carries an edge now, an urgency that was not there before. That's enough. Stand down. Kane ignores him completely. He is focused entirely on the woman in front of him, trying desperately to find the crack in whatever armor she has wrapped around herself. The vulnerable point where he can break through and provoke a reaction that makes sense to him. You're not even going to defend yourself. What kind of sailor just stands there and takes it like a punching bag? 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, 4 counts empty. The pattern holds without variation. Another SEAL, younger, maybe 26, leans toward his buddy and whispers urgently, "This is weird, man." She's not scared. She's not angry. What the hell is she? His companion shrugs, but the movement is uneasy, uncertain. Maybe she's got some kind of training, psych candidate or something. Kane reaches out again, this time grabbing Victoria's shoulder and giving it a rough shake that would rattle a normal person. I asked you a direct question. What kind of sailor stands there and takes abuse without fighting back or reporting it? Victoria's lips part slightly. When words emerge, they are measured and deliberate, chosen with surgical precision. The kind who knows when to fight and when to document. For half a heartbeat, something flickers across Kane's face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first stirring of recognition that he has just heard something that does not fit the narrative he constructed in his head about who this woman is and what she represents. But then his ego reasserts itself, his pride overriding whatever warning signal just fired in his brain. And he steps back, dusting his hands together like he has just handled something dirty that contaminated his skin. Document this, he says, and backhands her across the face. The slap cracks through the war room like a whip snapping. Victoria's head jerks to the side from the impact, her body following the momentum. A thin line of blood appears at the corner of her mouth where the inside of her lip caught against teeth. For 3 full seconds, nobody moves. Nobody breathes. The war room exists in a pocket of frozen time where 7 SEALs stand paralyzed in various positions, their brains struggling to process what just happened. Then Victoria straightens slowly, deliberately. She turns her head back to neutral position, raises one hand with controlled precision, and wipes the blood away with the back of her thumb. She examines the red smear for exactly 1 second before lowering her hand back to her side. She does not speak. She does not cry. She does not even look particularly hurt or affected. Just that same steady breathing, that same 1,000-yard stare focused on something beyond this room. Rodriguez takes an involuntary step forward, every instinct screaming that this situation is fundamentally wrong, in ways he cannot articulate. The woman should be reporting this assault. She should be angry or terrified or something human. Instead, she stands there like she is watching Kane through bulletproof glass, cataloging his actions with clinical detachment that belongs in an operating theater. Not a confrontation. Nothing to say. Kane impresses, his voice rising with frustration at her refusal to react the way he expects. No threats to report me, no tears, no begging. The tactical operations officer enters from the adjacent corridor carrying a tablet, looking harried and focused on his screen. Brief push to 1,300 hours, he announces without looking up. Admiral Harrison Blake's plane got delayed due to weather. Everyone clear the room except essential personnel. Now Kane points at Victoria with barely contained contempt. That include her. The ops officer barely glances up from his tablet, already mentally 3 steps ahead in his schedule. Observer roster is classified. You'll know who needs to be where when the brief starts. He waves a dismissive hand toward the exit. All of you move. The SEALs file toward the exit, gear clanking against their bodies. Low murmured conversation resuming as they process what just happened. Rodriguez passes close to Victoria on his way out, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. You okay? You need medical. Victoria does not turn her head to acknowledge him. Yes, Chief. That was out of line. You should report through proper channels. I will handle it appropriately. Thank you for your concern. The phrasing is perfect. Regulation compliant, completely devoid of actual information about what handling it appropriately means. Rodriguez hesitates, wanting to say more, but Kane is already calling impatiently from the doorway. Rodriguez, move it. We're not waiting for you. The chief leaves reluctantly. The room empties in stages. Victoria remains standing against the wall for another 30 seconds, alone in the space designed for strategic warfare planning, surrounded by maps and screens and classified intelligence. Then she walks to the nearest water fountain with measured steps, rinses her mouth carefully, spits pink-tinged water into the drain, and exits through a different door. The sun drops below the western horizon at 1823. Coronado Naval Base transitions into evening routine with practiced efficiency. Lights clicking on across administrative buildings in sequence. Personnel securing workspaces, locking classified materials in approved containers. The distant sound of colors being struck. The national anthem playing over speakers. Somewhere a helicopter conducts night landing practice, its rotors chopping through cooling air. Deep in the classified records facility, accessible only through 3 separate security checkpoints and a biometric scanner that reads retinal patterns, Victoria sits at a terminal in a room with no windows. The space measures exactly 12 feet by 8 feet. Concrete walls reinforced with steel mesh, a single overhead light that makes everything look slightly washed out and colorless. She opens a laptop that appears standard issue, but carries encryption protocols 3 levels above what typical Navy personnel ever encounter. The login process requires a retinal scan, a 16-digit alphanumeric code, and a physical authentication key that stays on her person at all times, secured around her neck on a chain made of surgical steel. The screen illuminates her face in cold blue light. Black Neptune, Mission 49A. Target Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kane. Suspected violation unauthorized disclosure of classified Aegis combat system technical specifications to foreign intelligence operatives. Estimated value of compromised data, $900 million. Estimated compromise to fleet security catastrophic. Authorization level Rear Admiral 07 minimum. Cover status deep insertion non-attributed personnel. Morning arrives at Coronado with aggressive sunshine. 0745 finds Victoria entering the war room exactly 15 minutes before the rescheduled briefing. The space has been reconfigured overnight. Additional secure terminals line 1 wall. Satellite imagery covers 3 large displays. A classification banner runs across every screen. Top secret. Special access required. No foreign nationals. She takes position in the back corner. Same unremarkable uniform. Same lack of insignia. The bruise on her jaw has darkened to deep purple. At 0752, the SEALs arrive in a cluster. Kane leads them, laughing about something, looking refreshed and confident. He spots Victoria immediately. The laughter cuts off like someone flipped a switch. You again. He crosses the room with aggressive swagger. I thought admin types didn't have clearance for special access briefings. Victoria stands at modified parade rest, hands clasped behind her back. I am authorized to be here. Authorized by who? Kane plants himself directly in front of her, invading her personal space. Show me your orders right now. My authorization is classified. Kane's face flushes red. You're lying. I think you conned your way in here, and you're pulling the same stunt today. He grabs her arm, fingers digging in above the elbow. You're leaving now. Victoria does not pull away. Her breathing remains steady, controlled. I am authorized to attend this briefing. You are interfering with a lawful operation. The phrasing is odd, specific, Wrong for a junior officer. Rodriguez frowns, catching it. Listen carefully, Kane says, voice dropping. You walk out right now, and I forget this happened. You stay and I make sure everyone knows you don't respect security protocols. Your choice. I am staying, Victoria says quietly. And that is when Kane punches her. Not a slap this time. A closed fist driven, with full mechanical advantage straight into her jaw. The impact makes a sound like a wooden mallet hitting meat. Victoria's head snaps back. Her knees unlock. She falls, hits concrete hard enough to knock air from her lungs. The war room goes silent. 7 SEALs stand frozen. Then the door opens. 6 men enter wearing service dress blues, shoulder boards gleaming with gold stars. 3 stars. 2 stars. 4 stars. Behind them, for military police in tactical gear, Admiral Harrison Blake steps forward, his voice cutting steel. Lieutenant Commander Kane, stand at attention. The temperature drops 20 degrees. Kane snaps upright, hands shaking. Sir, I can't explain. You will not speak unless questioned. Did you strike that service member? Yes, sir. With a closed fist. Admiral Thompson pulls a tablet, reads clearly. Rear Admiral Victoria Chun. Service number classified. Current assignment, Black Neptune, Operational Security Investigation. Rank 07. Rear Admiral, lower half. The words land like artillery shells. Rodriguez's knees buckle. The younger SEALs gasp. Kane's face cycles through shock, disbelief, recognition, horror. Rear Admiral, he whispers. That's impossible. There is no mistake, Admiral Blake says coldly. She was promoted 6 months ago under special authority. You just assaulted a flag officer in front of witnesses with security footage capturing every frame. You chose intimidation and violence instead of military courtesy. Kane sways. We served together. Yemen, I saved your life. Victoria meets his eyes for the first time. You were a hero then, Lieutenant Commander. Today you are a traitor. The difference is the choices you made when no one was watching. They take him away. The 6 admirals turn to Victoria and salute. She returns it crisply despite her swollen jaw. Justice is not loud. It is patient, methodical. It is a woman standing silent while collecting evidence, enduring assault while building a case, hiding her rank while defending her country. They asked her rank as a joke. Then every admiral in the war room saluted. 6 months later, the sterile corridors of the Navy Yard Tribunal building in Washington, D.C. hummed with the controlled tension that preceded military justice. The courtroom bore no resemblance to civilian legal proceedings. Gray walls lined with naval regulations and the code of military justice. Flags representing every branch of service flanked the bench where 3 senior officers would determine the fate of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kane. Victoria Chun entered through the rear entrance wearing her dress blues for the first time since the Coronado incident. The silver eagles on her collar caught the fluorescent lighting as she walked to the witness stand. Her jaw had healed completely, but the memory of that morning remained etched in institutional memory across multiple commands. Kane sat at the defense table flanked by 2 military attorneys whose expressions suggested they understood the magnitude of their challenge. The evidence against their client wasn't circumstantial or open to interpretation. Multiple witnesses, security footage, and documented patterns of behavior had created an airtight case that left little room for legal maneuvering. The presiding judge, Captain Sarah Morrison, called the proceedings to order with the crisp efficiency that marked career military lawyers. This tribunal convenes to address charges of assault upon a flag officer, conduct unbecoming an officer, and violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The prosecution will present evidence regarding incidents occurring at Naval Air Station Coronado on the dates specified in the charge sheet. Commander James Fletcher, the prosecutor, rose from his position with files that represented months of investigation extending far beyond the war room confrontation. The case against Lieutenant Commander Kane, he began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, reveals a pattern of misconduct that extends across multiple duty stations and involves numerous victims who previously lacked the rank or influence to seek redress through official channels. Victoria's testimony would anchor the prosecution's case, but Fletcher had discovered that Kane's behavior at Coronado represented the culmination of years of similar incidents that had been overlooked, minimized, or deliberately ignored by commanders who prioritized unit cohesion over individual justice. The first phase of testimony revealed the scope of Kane's misconduct through the voices of junior officers who had endured similar treatment but lacked Victoria's unique position and capabilities. Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos took the stand to describe an incident during Kane's previous assignment where he had physically intimidated her during a routine equipment inspection, questioning her competence and suggesting she belonged in administrative rather than operational roles. Lieutenant Junior Grade David Park testified about Kane's systematic harassment of female personnel in his previous command, creating a hostile work environment that had driven several qualified sailors to request transfers rather than continue serving under his authority. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez provided crucial testimony about the cultural dynamics that had allowed Kane's behavior to continue unchecked. The chief's 22 years of naval experience had shown him how institutional blind spots could protect officers whose technical competence masked serious character deficiencies. Kane was an effective operator, Rodriguez explained to the tribunal. His tactical knowledge and leadership capabilities in combat situations were undeniable, but his inability to treat fellow service members with basic respect created problems that extended far beyond individual incidents. Teams function on trust, and Kane systematically destroyed that trust through behavior that had nothing to do with military necessity. Victoria's testimony began with her credentials and the circumstances that had brought her to Coronado. The Black Neptune program represented a new approach to internal security investigations, she explained to the tribunal. Traditional military police investigations often failed to uncover systematic misconduct because perpetrators understood how to avoid detection through official channels. Deep insertion operations allowed investigators to observe behavior patterns that would normally remain hidden from official scrutiny. The program had identified Kane as a person of interest not because of the security violations he was suspected of committing, but because his pattern of misconduct had created vulnerabilities that foreign intelligence services might exploit. The security breach investigation had revealed that Kane's treatment of subordinates had created a network of personnel who harbored resentment against military leadership and might be susceptible to recruitment by hostile intelligence services. Several junior officers in Kane's previous commands had been approached by foreign operatives who understood that disaffected military personnel represented valuable intelligence assets. Kane's systematic harassment hadn't just violated military regulations. It had created national security risks that extended far beyond his immediate sphere of influence. Fletcher presented evidence showing that Kane's misconduct had contributed to the loss of at least 6 qualified female officers who had chosen to leave military service rather than continue facing the systematic harassment that Kane represented. Each departure represented years of training and experience that could not be easily replaced, along with the broader message sent to other women considering military careers. The institutional cost of Kane's behavior measured in human resources, training investments, and operational readiness exceeded anything that could be justified by his individual contributions to unit effectiveness. Victoria's calm recounting of the war room incident contrasted sharply with Kane's increasingly desperate attempts to justify his actions through his defense attorney's questioning. The confrontation hadn't occurred in isolation, Victoria explained. Kane's behavior followed patterns that she had observed during weeks of surveillance, representing the culmination of systematic misconduct rather than an isolated incident of poor judgment. His decision to physically assault what he perceived as a defenseless civilian contractor revealed character deficiencies that made him unsuitable for continued service in positions requiring judgment, restraint, and respect for military values. The defense attempted to portray Kane as a dedicated officer whose aggressive leadership style had been misinterpreted by personnel unprepared for the demands of Special Operations Service. His attorney presented character witnesses who testified to Kane's tactical competence and his effectiveness in combat situations where decisive action had saved lives and accomplished difficult missions. The defense argued that Kane's confrontational approach reflected military necessity rather than personal animosity, and that his actions at Coronado resulted from security concerns about unauthorized personnel in classified briefings. Victoria's cross-examination by the defense revealed the extent of her qualifications and the sophistication of the investigation that had identified Kane as a security risk. Her answers demonstrated knowledge of special operations procedures, intelligence protocols, and security requirements that surprised even the military attorneys who had spent months preparing for the tribunal. When the defense suggested that her undercover operation had entrapped Kane into behavior he wouldn't normally exhibit, Victoria's response was devastating in its simplicity. Lieutenant Commander Kane's actions followed patterns documented across multiple duty stations and involving numerous victims. The investigation didn't create his behavior. It simply provided the evidence necessary to address misconduct that had been allowed to continue for years without appropriate institutional response. Kane chose to physically assault someone he perceived as powerless to retaliate. That choice revealed his character more clearly than any testimony could. The tribunal's deliberation lasted 6 hours. Captain Morrison announced the findings with the solemnity appropriate for proceedings that would end a military career and potentially result in imprisonment. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kane, this tribunal finds you guilty on all charges. Your conduct violated fundamental principles of military service and created security risks that extended far beyond your individual actions. The evidence presented demonstrates a pattern of misconduct that makes you unsuitable for continued service in the United States Navy. Kane's sentencing included dismissal from service, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and 18 months of confinement at the Naval Consolidated Brig. The punishment reflected not just the assault on Victoria, but the broader pattern of misconduct that had damaged unit cohesion, driven qualified personnel from service, and created security vulnerabilities that hostile intelligence services had attempted to exploit. Kane sat motionless as Morrison read the sentence, his military career ending not through combat casualty or medical retirement, but through the consequences of choices that had systematically violated the trust placed in him by junior personnel who deserved protection rather than predation. The institutional changes that followed Kane's conviction extended throughout Naval Special Warfare Commands. Admiral Blake implemented new training requirements emphasizing respect, professional conduct, and the security implications of misconduct. Victoria's role in the investigation became a case study used in leadership development courses, demonstrating how institutional blind spots could be exploited by both hostile intelligence services and individuals who understood how to avoid accountability through traditional channels. 3 years after the tribunal, Victoria stood before a classroom of naval intelligence officers at the National Defense University, her admiral's stars reflecting the promotion that had followed her successful transition from undercover operations to institutional leadership. The students represented the next generation of officers who would face similar challenges in identifying and addressing threats that emerged from within military organizations rather than external enemies. The most dangerous adversaries, she explained to her students, are often the ones wearing the same uniform. They understand our procedures, our blind spots, and our reluctance to believe that fellow service members might represent threats to institutional integrity. Your mission extends beyond foreign intelligence services to include the systematic misconduct that creates vulnerabilities those services can exploit. Kane's case had demonstrated how individual misconduct could cascade into institutional problems that threaten national security through mechanisms that traditional security protocols failed to address. The investigation had revealed recruitment attempts by foreign intelligence services targeting personnel who felt betrayed by military leadership, creating counterintelligence challenges that extended far beyond the immediate victims of misconduct. Understanding these connections required investigators who could operate within military culture while maintaining the objectivity necessary to identify systemic problems. Victoria's students learned that justice in military organizations required patience, methodical documentation, and the courage to endure misconduct long enough to gather evidence that could support institutional change. The Black Neptune program had evolved into a permanent capability that addressed threats emerging from within military organizations, recognizing that institutional integrity required constant vigilance against corruption, misconduct, and the cultural blind spots that allowed both to flourish. The classroom discussions revealed how Kane's case had influenced policy changes throughout the Department of Defense. New reporting mechanisms protected personnel who identified misconduct while ensuring that investigations could proceed without alerting subjects who might otherwise modify their behavior to avoid detection. Training programs emphasized the security implications of misconduct, helping commanders understand that character deficiencies in their subordinates represented operational risks rather than merely disciplinary problems. Years later, when asked about the personal cost of her undercover assignment, Victoria's response reflected the professional perspective that had characterized her approach to the investigation. Every mission requires sacrifice. The question isn't whether you're willing to endure hardship, but whether the mission justifies the cost. Protecting military personnel from systematic misconduct while preventing the security vulnerabilities that misconduct creates seemed worth a few bruises and some damaged pride. Kane served his full sentence at the Naval Consolidated Brig, where his former status as a Special Operations Officer provided no protection from the consequences of his choices. His fellow inmates included other military personnel whose careers had ended through various forms of misconduct, creating a community of individuals who had betrayed the trust placed in them by their services and their fellow service members. Kane's adjustment to confinement proved difficult, as someone accustomed to exercising authority over others struggled with the powerlessness that defined military imprisonment. Upon release, Kane faced the challenges common to veterans whose separation from service resulted from criminal conviction rather than honorable completion of military obligation. His security clearance had been permanently revoked, eliminating employment opportunities in defense, contracting, or other fields that valued military experience. The skills that had made him an effective special operations officer proved difficult to translate into civilian occupations that required the interpersonal capabilities he had never developed. Victoria's career continued its upward trajectory through assignments that leveraged her unique combination of operational experience and investigative expertise. Her promotion to Rear Admiral had been accelerated through recognition that her capabilities represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking that military organizations needed to address 21st-century challenges. Her reputation within the intelligence community reflected not just her successful completion of the Kane investigation, but her ability to identify institutional problems that traditional approaches had failed to address. The broader implications of Kane's case continued reverberating throughout military culture years after his conviction. Training programs incorporated lessons learned from his misconduct into professional development curricula that emphasized character development alongside technical competence. Military leaders learned to recognize warning signs that indicated when aggressive leadership crossed the line into abusive conduct, understanding that institutional tolerance for such behavior created security risks that extended far beyond immediate victims. Victoria's final reflection on the case emphasized the importance of institutional accountability in maintaining military effectiveness. Kane's misconduct hadn't emerged from nowhere. It had been enabled by commanders who prioritized technical competence over character, by peers who remained silent when they witnessed inappropriate behavior, and by institutional cultures that treated aggressive conduct as evidence of military bearing rather than character deficiency. Addressing systematic misconduct required changes that extended throughout military culture, recognizing that individual cases reflected broader institutional problems that demanded comprehensive solutions. The lessons learned from Kane's case became part of Victoria's legacy as she transitioned into senior leadership positions that influenced military policy across multiple services. Her understanding of how misconduct could create security vulnerabilities informed approaches to personnel security that extended far beyond traditional counterintelligence methods. Military organizations learned to recognize that protecting institutional integrity required the same systematic approach used to address external threats, with investigations that could identify problems before they escalated into security breaches or criminal misconduct. Justice had been patient, methodical, and ultimately decisive. A woman who had endured assault while collecting evidence had transformed individual suffering into institutional change that protected future generations of military personnel. The price paid by Kane reflected not just his individual choices, but the broader principle that character failures in military service carried consequences that extended far beyond personal careers. Military effectiveness depended on trust, and that trust required accountability for those who systematically violated it through misconduct that threatened both individual welfare and institutional integrity.